it came to dispersals, it was like, holy heck, you can get into a line, okay, from the guy who was dispersing it, and you'll be top flight, and the prices went zooming up in the air, kind of. So it was very, very interesting. Mm-hmm. Okay, so Len, thank you very much. I have another appointment, and goodbye.
And that was it. And that was it. Thank you, Len. So I guess we'll start. It's just a few minutes after 5 o'clock. So we'll get started because I know we have a lot of questions to ask. And of course, Len Green is not a stranger to us. And John Green, I saw John, I think, jump on just a second ago. The Greens are not, they're not strangers to us. Of course, they've been very generous with us with the club. And Len has just been involved in racing for, we'll say several years. We'll say probably what, 40 years, Len? Has it been 40 years?
Yeah, that's the problem. I keep on thinking that in 40 years, I should know more than John. Right?
Is that true? There we go. John's on there. He's smiling. He heard that one. So I think we're going to start with, obviously, you've been associated with some really nice horses, either bred them, raced them, bred and raced them. Jaywalk, of course, jumps to mind. She was a recent Breeders' Cup winner. November Snow, she was a beautiful, classy filly. Executive Privilege. You've had some really nice ones, Len. But tell me just quickly, for those of us who maybe are not familiar, tell us, how did you get involved in racing? What was the impetus for you to jump in?
I tell you, people say racing is an expensive sport. I was fortunate that I got in as a limited partner for the New Jersey Nets and the Long Island Islanders and the Long Island Lizards, all professional teams. That's expensive. This is comparatively expensive in the sense that you can go to a sale like we did, and you can buy a $700,000 horse, and you also can buy a $2,500 horse. Okay, we did both. Okay, so you can get into this game at any level, and it's just very, very exciting. And it's even more exciting when you actually know something about it, where you feel comfortable that you can ask a trainer something, or you can ask another owner something, or you can ask a jockey something. It's really very, very exciting. And then, of course, it's very nice. It's like a sundae with a strawberry on top or cherry on top and whipped cream. If you get the tax deductions along with it, to me, it makes it even more exciting, okay, and more affordable. And again, you know, we're just as excited as all heck. You mentioned some great names before, but Proven Strategies tomorrow has a really good shot at this, okay? And like everything else, if it doesn't win, then we have to fire our manager, you know, John Green, bring somebody else in. But it's not just owning a good horse, it's placing the horse in the right spot and knowing something about it and looking at it. So maybe when John jumps on later on, talk about the strategy of some of these things, because it's not a inactive sport. It's a really an active sport, because that's really where all the excitement comes from. And again, you know, being part of the Empire Club and being able to be exposed to some of these things, not only the tax aspects and the accounting aspects, but, you know, join TOBA, okay, and do those, so that you can be as knowledgeable as you can about it. I think, you know, the question that I get most of the time, Christina, on some of the other things, and again, we're fortunate now, okay? There's no other accounting firm that owns, you know, several hundred horses the way we do, okay? Or has won 2,400 races the way we have. So that when we have that kind of background, it leads itself to becoming the accountant for over 400 people in the horse business, because they can't go anywhere else to really get the right answers, because the other answers they're going to get are the theoretical answers or the written answers. They don't get the practical kind of answers. So again, it's really enjoyable. It's really enjoyable to get involved with them, et cetera. But the question that everybody asks the most, believe it or not, is if someone incurs expenses in the horse business and wants to be able to take a tax deduction, how do you go about doing it? And the answer is, number one, you treat it like a business. because it is a business. It's fun, but it's a business. Okay. So you set up a separate checking account. Okay. And I always like people to say, okay, if I was Diane Spiro, I would have Diane Spiro Racing. Okay. Not Diane Spiro Medical. Okay. So that you would again have that you're writing checks out of that account. And number two, okay, you pay your horse related expenses out of it. Okay. So if you're going to the track, you write your checks out of that. Okay. If you're coming up with other expenses, if you want to send, if you want to send Christina a Christmas gifts, okay, write the check out of that. Okay. Everything that's horse related comes out of that. And then number three is keep an informal record of the hours that you spent on horse related activities, including this, because this qualifies as horse related activities. And then if you happen to be fortunate enough to have your spouse with you, okay, the spouse's hours add up to you with your hours. So you get double hours, okay, toward that 100-hour thing. And then at the end of the year, if you have 100 hours or so and you have expenses, well, you can take those expenses as a tax deduction. That kind of makes it fun. It really does. Okay, that's my question for the day. I'm ready, Christine, to have everybody else ask questions.
Does anybody have a question they want to ask Len right away? Does anybody off the top?
Come on, you get a prize.
Oh, I see somebody.
One.
Okay, that's Shane. Shane can ask. Okay, let's see if we can unmute him. Hold on a second.
Shane, and then I saw Joe has his hand up. Okay.
Hey, I think I'm unmuted.
Yes, hi, Shane.
Hi. So I have a question, because I know this year you bought a lot of horses overseas, I think probably for the first time. What
Yes.
are the tax implications of buying it overseas compared to in the US, or are there none?
Shane, that is a really, really good question, okay? To get the understanding of it, okay? The tax law says that you can get all these special tax benefits, including the fact that they passed in 2021, that you could write off 100% of the cost of buying a horse. 100%, not a 3-year life, not a 7-year life, 100% of it. Okay. But then they put a little scrimmage in there. They said, as long as it's a domestic. Oh, well, that doesn't sound like you can go overseas and buy the horse, because that's not domestic. So for years, okay, we didn't buy any horses overseas. Now, there's two things to this. Okay, Chris, do me a favor also. If I get off on a tangent too far, just kind of go, or just kind of do something, and then they get me back. Okay, so number one, we didn't buy overseas because we didn't know anybody overseas to help us buy the horse. And you certainly don't want to buy horses where you don't have control over the price or the type of horse it is. So that was barrier number one to entry. Number two barrier to entry was it was a foreign horse. Okay. And then I started talking to people who were in the industry. Okay, people like Peter Brand, for instance, who has a number of excellent horses that he's bought overseas that he's kind of headed and won the Breeders' Cup with. And suddenly I said to John, John, it's starting to make sense to me. If we could find some contacts over there that we felt comfortable with, and we could set up a way to get the horses back here. Well, let me go into the tax code a little bit and try to figure it out. And sure enough, there's a provision that says no matter if it was bought overseas, if it races here, ding dong, I know we're going to get a tax deduction. So Shane, the answer is two parts of it. One, we had to figure out a way to be able to buy it and feel comfortable buying it, that we're buying at the right price, and that we inspected the horse, et cetera, because US vets, okay, are not going over to Tatters to go out and look at horses for me. So it was a whole new system of trying to checks and balances. But once John was able to do that, okay, then we figured out a way to get a tax deduction for it. And then we figured out a way to get it here. Okay. And with the turf racing the way it is, Shane, I really think that's a new element in how we can make some money.
Okay.
John, you can jump in anytime you want to, if you want to, on these.
I had a question for you, Len. Oh, somebody,
And remember, Joe's got a hand up also, okay?
hold on. I see somebody. Hold on a second, Joe. Let's try to unmute you, Joe. 1 second. Okay, there you go. I think, hold on. Joe, are you up? Hold on.
Okay, and we have checked to make sure there's no internal revenue agents on the call.
There we
Okay,
go.
Joe, I think you're up now.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, Zoom. Thanks, Mr. Green.
Yeah.
We've been part of Empire now for 2 years, and
Right.
before that, we were involved with Little Red Feather.
Right.
That was through crowdfunding.
Yes.
And so my question is, can participants in either that sort of thing, crowdfunding, or this particular endeavor, Empire, can they gain any tax advantages,
That is
even though we don't own the horse? Members here don't really own the horse in the same manner as your group does.
Real, Joe, again, excellent question. Okay, you would think the logical answer is if you don't own a horse, you're not in the horse business. But you're allowed to have pre-ownership type deductions. And that is, you're learning about the business, you're incurring expenses in it before you actually get in the water and own a horse. So the answer is yes. Okay. Then you have to get into the hurdle of, am I spending at least 100 hours? And that's why I started talking about that before. And are you treating it as a business, or are you treating it like a hobby? Okay. If you can get over those two hurdles, Joe, it is deductible. Okay. Because again, no one in their right mind, I think, should go into the horse business before they have this kind of preparation. And you're getting that kind of preparation, okay, which is very, very important. Because Christina's bringing in some very interesting people, knowledgeable people. The key is you got to be able to ask questions. I repeat again, because if you do, then you really are trying to learn, and you are pre-operating expenses, okay?
Okay.
But again, great question. I put a little star next to your name, Joe. So if you don't get 3 other better questions, that's a winner so far. Okay. Okay. At this point, Christina, do you want to ask a quick question?
I just wanted to, I wanted to clarify something. So you started off and you told us that what I was going to ask you was, so we don't have to start off right off the bat in owning horses. As far as if we're investing our time, and even we're investing money in the industry, whether it's learning, I don't know if wagering, like if we're spending,
No.
So I think if it's.
No, wagering is not.
Okay.
Sessions like this, TOBA, okay, reading TDN, okay,
Okay.
those are all okay.
Okay, and you don't have
again,
to.
Going to the racetrack
Mhm.
and in the paddock with us and stuff, and kind of listening to the instructions for the trainer. Okay, those are all
Included.
John said he can't answer any questions because he's muted, so unless they unmute
okay.
him.
Hey, Chris, Chris, even though most people don't do this, can you unmute John so that he could at least say something?
Oh, John, are you unable? Hold on a second. Let me unmute.
But Chris, if he monopolizes the airtime, can we mute him again?
We'll mute him again. Okay. Well, sorry, I didn't realize that you guys can't unmute yourselves. Maybe it was just the way it's set up. You should be unmuted now, John.
Everything is good, and no one's been able to mute him for 85 years. So don't.
So, okay, so I think that was the question. So wagering is not included, but anything educational, and as you said, Len, we should have like a specific account designated for whether we're paying our dues. So whatever that's educationally inclined, should be coming out of that account. Is that correct?
Yeah, and if you went to the track to see your horse, even though you don't quote own the horse, okay, you went to see an Empire horse. There was an awful lot of people down in Gulfstream for instance. Okay, if I was their accountant, I would have said, okay, you went to Gulfstream, okay, you stood in the paddock, you saw the horse, etc., kind of thing. Since the primary purpose of going to the track that day was to watch your horse, all expenses incurred that day, including the meals, okay, would be deductible. The parking would be deductible.
Mhm. So Len, what about, I've gotten mixed, because I've had several members already ask me this, and I've gotten mixed responses about this. Our dues that we pay to be part of the Empire Racing Club, can we deduct those or not?
The answer is yes, as long as you get over that second hurdle of, are you spending at least 100 hours?
Okay, 100 hours for the year? Are we
For
talking
the
for the calendar?
year, and it's a combination of you and your spouse, or okay, and it
Okay.
includes going to the track if your horse was running, going to sessions when we were allowed to go to sessions, reading TDN, etc. All those count as part of it. Yes.
Okay, okay, wonderful. I don't know if anybody else has a question, or maybe, John, you wanted to add something, but that's really great information. Thank you, Len, because we get that question a lot.
Yeah, Christine, I think the most important thing, and Dad mentioned it before, was you just, if you designate a credit card and also a separate bank account, then it's showing the IRS proof that you've taken the additional steps to formulate a business plan and have segregated funds, just for the horse industry. So that's really of utmost importance to be able to justify, being able to write off some of these expenses that you mentioned.
Okay, okay. And
Okay.
so Len, is 2020, looking back on 2020, because let's say presumably everybody didn't clock their hours for 2020, but they were part of the club, and they attended a lot of these events, and that, is 2020 like lost to us? Like we can't really do with anything 2020, we just only have to look to 2021?
No, you certainly can look back to 2020 and try to, in your mind, add up the number of hours that you spent. Now, again, that 100 hours is flexible too because of COVID, because you couldn't have gone to sales, you couldn't have gone. Okay, so in our case, okay, we didn't travel to sales from April on. We used to travel to all the sales, okay, and spend 3 or 4 days down there, kind of thing. But it's interesting if I ask John the question, how many hours do you think you spent in the last 3 or 4 days? Okay, because we ended up buying 5, 6, 8 horses, but we also bid on 20 some odd horses. John, how much time would you say that a person spends analyzing the horses and talking to the vets and talking to the other people around, okay, and the trainers?
Yeah, and also included is, for the racing horses that are in the sale, watching the races and doing the analytics and everything like that. So it really goes back not just for the 4 days of the sale, but it probably goes back 2 full weeks. And that alone, I mean, I don't think I'm being, I'm exaggerating at all when I say it was 15, 16 hours a day for 6, 7 days straight. I mean, that's not unusual for the kind of analytics that we do. And whether it's physically being on the grounds when we used to be able to go to the sales and walking the barns and talking to people and watching the horses and getting involved in bidding and having meetings in between, or being at my desk and doing a lot of that virtually, that probably eclipsed the 100 hours alone just in that January sale. And then that's kind of a mid-size sale. There's 2-day sales, and this one was a 4-day sale, and there's the September and November sales in at Keeneland, which are a week and a half. So you'd be amazed if you sat down and actually just kept a ledger at your desk of the number of hours approximately that you put in, almost like a timesheet. I'll guarantee you, because all you guys are active, I'll guarantee you that literally within the first 2 months you probably would have eclipsed that 100 hours.
Okay.
And again, somewhere along the line, you really ought to feel comfortable of saying, hey, what will it take to be active and actually own a horse if you're tied up on the own your horse. And then again, I'm not promoting my race horse, but for $100 or $200, you actually can own a piece of a horse, a micro piece, but a piece. So if you're caught up in well, you know, I'm not sure, and I sort of want to be examined by the IRS, then buy a micro piece or something or other, or have a couple of you get together. Again, we bought, I'm not saying 2,500, it's nothing, but we bought a horse for 2,500 that I think is worth, you know, far greater than that, just because on the fourth day of the sale, there was nobody looking for those kind of horses, kind of thing. So it is fun. Yes, there's training fees and stuff like that kind of thing, but there are plenty of trainers out there who are willing to do deals with new people or take a piece of the horse in return for the training fees. So there's ways of getting into ownership if you want to.
Okay. I don't know if there are any more questions. So I'm going to ask, actually, Shane is on the line still. He sent in a couple of questions, and also Anne had sent in a couple of questions. I don't know if you wanted to ask, go ahead and ask Len directly, or if you wanted to have me ask. I think, Anne, you're on there. Oh yeah, here, I'm going to unmute you, Anne. If you just want to ask your questions, or any of your questions that pertain to Len. Here, I think you're unmuted. You can go
Hi,
ahead.
can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you. Go ahead, Anne.
Hi. So one of the questions I had was about leasing horses versus owning horses, and what you thought of that process.
Excellent. Okay, again, that gets over that hurdle that Christina brought up before, that most people have that feeling about, gee, if I really don't own something or lease something, okay, am I really in the horse business? So your question is very good, because the rules are the same of whether you own the horse or lease the horse, same as they are for a house. Same kind of thing. So yes, leasing it is just as good as far as the IRS is concerned. Those lease expenses are tax deductible as long as you're active. Very good question.
That being said, and you know, leasing was a lot more popular for racing and for broodmares in years gone by, and I think that it's kind of been replaced more by what Dad was mentioning before of these partnerships and micro shares. So you don't see nearly as many lease options for racehorses as had been, you know, maybe 10 or 15 years ago. But what I guess what that's saying is the tax advantages are still there if one avails itself.
Yeah, it's just that the tax, because John, they've gone ahead and said, hey, instead of 7 years, 3 years, and now 1 year,
Right.
Most people are saying, hey, why not go and get, let's say I buy a horse in December and I don't pay for it until December, or I go to the bank and they lend me money and I don't really pay for it until the next 3 years. You're still allowed 100% tax deduction in the year that you buy the horse, even if you don't pay for it. So, and that's the reason, the basic reason why leasing is not as popular as it was when you had to depreciate the horses over 7 years. But there's still some out there.
Mm-hmm.
But why not, instead of, as John said, instead of leasing a horse, to get the same objective of being, quote, ownership, why not buy a microchip?
Yeah, and you have to, the other thing is you have to be careful with these micro shares also, because I know myracehorse.com and we don't you know have a dog in the fight. There's a lot of micro share opportunities that are out there, so it's not that we're trying to push one over the other, but you have to really read the contract, because myracehorse.com, I think it actually says that you don't have ownership of the horse. So if you don't actually have ownership of the horse, then, you know, what Len's saying is you can't depreciate that. You can write off expenses, you know, for if you have a lawyer look at the contract, or you go to the races, or you buy the paraphernalia, you know, you can still get expenses, but there's no depreciation that's affiliated with your micro share ownership. So just be careful when you ultimately decide on if you're going to go the micro share route, that it actually says that you own a small percentage of the horse while it's racing, because that's the most important thing when it comes to the depreciation part of it. But horses right now are getting less expensive, believe it or not, because the upper echelon of the horses are getting more and more expensive, and then there's a vacuum of a lack of dearth of owners that want to own horses in that $5, $10, $20,000 range. So in years past, it was a lot tougher to buy a horse at that level, and now there are just not a lot of owners that want to do that. So we went to the, we virtually went to the January sale, and we literally bought a couple of racehorses at the upper top end, for a lot of money. And then we bought a broodmare for $13,000, and a yearling for $19,000, and another yearling for $2,500. And it honestly, it wasn't because there's a lack of talent, or the horses weren't good looking. It was that, the mare was 18 years old, and for most people in the industry, that's the expiration date. They don't want to own mares past, 17, 18 years old. And the less expensive yearlings that we bought just weren't by fashionable sires. They were by Ironicus and Air Force Blue. And there's nothing to say that either one of those aren't going to be great sires. They just haven't done it in their first crop. And the industry is so quick to basically disregard stallions if they don't hit in their first crop, that the foals from their next couple of crops are decreased in value tremendously. So we see it as an opportunity, and I think that if you're going to get involved in the racing, those are good opportunities to find it. They're not scratching dents. There's nothing wrong with the horses, except that they're just not by fashionable sires.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And Christina, I remember in our early days, okay, before John came aboard, okay, we used to, in the neighborhood, okay, we would take 3 or 4 or 5 of the neighbors, and we'd be talking about and say, you know what, let's go down to Monmouth Park, because we're only 20 minutes away from Monmouth Park. Let's go down and buy a horse. So we would pool $1,000 or $2,000 or $3,000 each, okay, and throw it in and go down and claim a horse. And it was kind of fun because there were people that we knew, what have you. Part of this club, okay, after a while you get to know each other. You're going to feel comfortable saying, hey, let's do something on a small scale, okay, and do it, and then there's no question, okay.
Mm-hmm. 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 Shane, I think you have a question if you wanted to ask Len.
Yeah, I actually have 2.
Okay.
So one of them is, I know the handles at the tracks were strong last year, but I'm curious what the pandemic effect you think will be on the owner side, as far as whether it's at the breeding side or on the sales. Like, what do you think the long-term effects are from the owner side?
John, the last I read about Monmouth Park is, for instance, okay, it's going to be strong. I saw that New York, you're on the board. I think those pots are even larger this time.
Yeah, they basically for New York, and Shane, are you planning on ultimately racing in New York or New Jersey, or what jurisdiction do you think?
I don't know. I'm still looking for a partner, so I'm going to ask your dad what he wants to do with me, and we'll just partner up on something.
Right. Be careful what you wish for. Be careful what you wish for. That's all I'll say.
Hey, Shane, I got to tell you, for this past year or so, okay, John's been running the operation, and maybe I need a new manager or partner.
John, who?
The quick answer to go back to your question is that New York, really looks like that they're going to be strong. They announced, I think within the past week or 2 weeks, that the average purses are going up for the Belmont Spring meet, and then they'll go up again for the Saratoga meet. So so purses are going to be fine in New York, at least for the next year or so. Other racetracks are going to have problems. Parks and Pennsylvania in general, they closed their casinos for a great period of time, and over 80% of the purses for Parks Racing, for example, is derived from the casino. So they didn't have a stopgap, a slush fund like New York did, where when those casinos were closed, the purse monies went way down, and they're going to continue to struggle because if they get hit again with a closure, then it's a direct effect. New York, it's public record. New York has $20 million in their quote unquote purse slush fund. So theoretically, the Aqueduct casino could be closed for 9 months straight without earning a dollar before it would affect the New York purses. So I think if you were going to pick a jurisdiction, again, we live in New Jersey, and we'd love for New Jersey racing to be stronger. But in reality, New York, Kentucky, and Canada are probably going to be the three strongest racing jurisdictions over the next 3 to 5 years, unless something dramatically happens in California or Florida.
Yeah. And then I did have a second question. This one I have no knowledge of whatsoever. For any of like the trainers, tracks, anybody who did the paycheck protection last year, as far as going for that, what are the tax implications this year for that?
Okay, yeah, I thought you were going to ask me a question about trainers.
I can ask you that too if you want. I can talk to you all night.
Hey, very, very interesting about the PPP. Okay, it's taken a number of turns. It's almost like a racetrack where you think that there's a straightaway and you think that there's a right answer, and then suddenly you have to go around and come back again. Okay, it's very, so when PPP first came out, it looked like it was a great deal, and then they started saying, well, if you're eligible, okay, you can apply, but there's no one way to apply, so they made that difficult. And then they didn't tell the banks which way they were going to go, so the banks had their own forms and things. But when they finally straightened all that out, okay, they said, hey, great, now we'll forgive the amount of money that you borrowed under the PPP program, as long as you can show that you used it for basically payroll or rent or utilities. And then they came back and said, whoa, wait a second, you can forgive it, but we're not going to give you a tax deduction then for the salaries, rent, and utilities. And everybody, oh, like, I suddenly have a huge tax bill. And then finally Congress, just a couple of weeks ago, came back and said, oh, wait a second, IRS, that's not what we intended. And now you not only have a forgiveness of that PPP if you used it for the things you said you were going to use it, but also you can take deductions for those things. So my telephone's been ringing off the hook, okay, kind of thing. And once I settled that down with them, then they said, well, there's going to be another PPP. This one is based on a different criteria. This one you have to show any quarter during 2020 if it was 25% less in revenue than the one in 19. Now you're eligible for a second PP, which is really great. And then the question, well, are you going to let us deduct the expenses? And that's now going through Congress, but it looks like that's what's going to be okay. And then these payments that you're supposedly gotten or could have gotten if you didn't have the wrong number as far as the $600 one, now that's finally getting straightened out. And then the new bill says we're going to make an additional $1,400 per person. So these are all accountants' employment acts. So as a result of that, I can get to be successful as an accountant, and I can go out and buy more horses. You got to change. So far, I got Shane down, I got Ann down, and I got Joe down. Is there anybody who wants to take a shot at the prize? Because so far I got 3 people.
I think we have Stephen. Hold on a second, Stephen.
Okay.
Let me try
Stephen,
to.
this is going to be easy. Just ask the question I asked you to ask. So I look good.
Stephen, I think your mic is up.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you so much. Thank you again, Mr. Green and
Len,
for your Len, for being so generous with your time. If I could just test my understanding on something. So I spent this year, well, 2020, educating myself to become an owner of a horse. I've been in the club. I've attended Zoom meetings. I flew down to Gulfstream to see a horse race. I've
good.
done all these different things that I've incurred expenses. Are you saying that can be written off against ordinary income?
As long as you're, quote, active.
Right. So if I can prove that this is not a hobby, but it is a serious business interest, and although I don't physically own a horse right now, I'm prepping myself and this is all education, then that legitimately can be written off against other sources of income.
And Stephen, you have about 2 years, okay, to be able to do that. And then we have to SHIT
Okay.
or leave the pot, okay?
And one potential cost of ownership, as you said, is micro shares, things like that, as long as you actually own the horse, not that it's more like a club, but as long as you're seriously moving towards claiming a horse in partnership and or whatever, all of these expenses are legitimately deductible.
Yeah, and remember, if you want to add to that, you can read some of Christina's stuff that she writes, okay? Because that's all related.
Can I ask you one other question, which I actually broached one other time? You gave me a response, which I understood, but I just wanted to share my train of thought on something. I had asked if you used a self-directed IRA to invest in horse ownership, if that was a viable vehicle to get to ownership. And you said that you certainly could, but the disadvantage is there's no write-off now because it's not taxed money. But in an environment where, if you believe the stock market is in a bubble, and then other sources of investments are offering very low returns, couldn't you see potentially using retirement assets as a way to enjoy the ownership game?
See, that's very interesting, because the first time that I gave that answer, I kind of felt pretty good about it, because I said, hey, the law doesn't change, and if you can't get the advantages of the tax deduction, why make the investment? Okay, and then just about 2 months ago, okay, the IRS talked about investments that you can make out of the IRA, okay, that were reasonable and conservative, et cetera, kind of thing. And horse racing was not as part of it. Okay, so they haven't woken up yet how profitable like horse racing can be, kind of thing. So for the time being, not only aren't the tax deductions allowable, but you risk having the IRAs be jeopardized because you're investing in something they don't think is the right thing to do. But it's a great question, Steve.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right.
These are great questions, aren't they? We've got some really great questions. So Len, you basically said to us, okay, so we start off, we're going to become horse owners in 2021 at some juncture. We get our bank, we get an account, or as John had said, like a designated account for everything to come out of this particular account. We start clocking our hours to make sure that we know exactly how much time we're putting in. We've put in and we're putting in, certainly going forward. What else? What's the next consideration that we need to check off in terms of looking ahead to when we file taxes for the 2021? What's the next thing we need to look at or consider?
If you don't want to go through all of the bank account, et cetera, kind of thing, John's idea of having a separate credit card just designated for horse-related expenses is even better sometimes, because that's easy for your credit card to put down something racing or something on it. Okay. Again, you want that idea that if you ever do get examined, okay, that you have business-like, and you can show nothing's worse than if you ever did get examined. And again, the amount of examinations are not that great, but let's say you did get examined, okay, you certainly don't want someone looking through your checkbook, okay, to see other things that you're doing that are not horse related. So the credit card's a very, very good idea. And as I said to Steve before, there is this pre-period, okay, that you can get started with taking expenses and putting it on a Schedule C, okay? And then where it lists occupation, don't put down hobby, okay? Because this isn't a hobby. You're at this point in time, when you think that you're putting in this time for this podcast, it's not because Len Green is giving you the greatest answers in the world of all time on how to make money. It's you're interested. You're obviously interested, okay? In it. That's the first step, okay? The interest, which then leads to something else, which leads to something else. I mean, when you start reading about "'Tis the Law," which you know got an awful lot of publicity this year because of the races that it won, okay? And then there was a great article in either TDN or Blood Horse about how the group got together, and they were all friends, okay? And they got together with a couple $100 originally to buy their first horse. And then suddenly, years later, they're standing in the winner's circle of the Kentucky Derby.
Okay. Does anybody else have a question for Len? Because we also want to get a chance to ask about proven strategies and just briefly talk about his race tomorrow. Are there any more questions?
Yeah, and plus the fact we ought to leave at least a minute or two for Gary, right?
Oh yeah, I saw Gary popped up here. I just saw him just a minute ago. We see you, Gary. Gary Falter's on. We're going to be talking to Gary from Ownerview in just a few moments.
And Gary, you missed all the great tax answers I gave. Okay, I don't want to be on any panel with any owners. I want to be on a panel where we give them advice.
Yeah. We actually we recorded it, so we're gonna everybody will be able to watch. Len, I think unless somebody else has a question, I just have one more question that I want to ask you. What is the thing when you see new owners in their first season or maybe their first couple of seasons? What is the most common? I don't want to say mistakes, because as you said, you know, things happen, but what are the things that you find, like with new owners, maybe some of the things, the obstacles that they face in the first season or two that you tend to notice?
Yeah, Dad, is it okay if I jump in on this one? Because I know you would answer questions from a tax standpoint, which obviously is important. But Christina, the quickest way that people get out of the business is that they meet up and associate themselves and invest money with people who are just unscrupulous. And unfortunately, this industry is an unregulated industry. Unlike accounting, where you have the CPA designation, finance, you have the CFP designation. We all are in businesses where you have to earn a designation and continue to keep a designation. And if you don't do things by the rules and regulations of the industry, you lose that designation. There's no such animal like that in horse racing. And that's kind of the dark underbelly of the industry, is that, you know, if somebody takes advantage of you, you don't really have any leg to stand on when it comes to getting retribution or getting your money back. And that's why it's so important to be associated with people that have good reputations, that have been in the business for a long time, that don't have issues from a legal standpoint, don't have issues from medication rule violations, things like that. And I'm not just saying this, Gary, because you're here now, but one of the reasons why we're so involved in Empire Racing and TOBA and other associations is because we're trying to make sure that new people who come into the business, because it's so hard to get new people in the business, that they get a fighting chance and they stay in the industry. So the next step, and Christina, I think you asked this before, what do you do once you get your business set up and once you get your checking account set up and the designated credit card? You have to interview people in the business, and don't give money to the first person you talk to. Interview 3 or 4 or 5 different trainers and other owners and get references and talk to people until you feel comfortable giving them money, because they have all the leverage once you give them the money.
Right. And I think that's great that you bring that up, John, because that's when we get to Gary, if the things we'll talk about with Gary in just a moment. Ownerview, it's a tremendous resource in terms of looking at these trainers and looking at these syndicates and just deciding what fits you. So Gary, we're going to come to you. That's really going to be a big part of what we're going to talk about with Gary in a second. But before, Len, from a tax implication, that same question, do you find that newbies tend to make certain types of mistakes when it comes, or again, they tend to make some oversights when they start on?
Well, again, a couple of them. And Gary, I think I have about 15 more minutes to talk about taxes, and then it's yours. Also, when you say to me, can you take a tax deduction for it? Again, if the accountant doesn't know the horse business, the first thing that's gonna come to mind is, this is just a hobby, okay? And if it's a hobby, you can't take a deduction for it. Or if you're gonna tell me it's in business, it's a passive business, and therefore if you have losses, you can only deduct it against passive income. So that's another hurdle in the thing, that not only aren't you're going to say to yourself, educated. Accountants in general are not educated about the horse business. But the other part of it, before we leave, it is the excitement that you get from being part of proven strategies, whether it's ownership or not, kind of thing. I mean, it is exciting, and the work that now John goes into finding the right race that we're competitive in. And again, after a while, you've been in the business, you're going to know that if you're running at 20-to-1 odds, you're in the wrong place. Okay, I don't care what the trainer may say. You got to get into a position where you're always running in with odds of, I'd say, less than 10%, because then you have a competitive chance of actually winning. And then there's, okay, getting a trainer who's really interested in what you're doing, okay, and you're not one of 50 different people, okay, and then you got to be able to get some jockeys who really want to ride your horse, and so placing the horse in the right spot, etc., kind of thing. It's a real business, and I think the better you're educated on it and what's going on around it, then you can enjoy it better.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, speaking, I mean, obviously Proven Strategies, he's been such a gift to us. All the horses have been gifts to us, because I was talking to John the other day. We've learned something with every one of them. And I think that was the whole point, because as John has said, Len has said, like in the past, you know, you're going to have, yes, if you're lucky, you'll have winners. And more often than not, the horses, whether it's injury, as we experienced with Starlit Daydream, or whether it's retirement, or maybe they're just, you know, they're not competitive at certain levels, and that happens. So we've experienced all of that. We've been fortunate, but I don't know whether Len, John, if you want to talk to us just a little bit, because we've got Gary waiting. We'll start with him in just a few moments and talk about ownership, but I just wanted to know if you can give us an update on Proven Strategies, and maybe we could just take a look at tomorrow's race really quick and see how does Proven Strategies fit in there, how competitive it is.
Yeah, and Christina, thank you. We'll do the quick spot, because I don't want to take Gary's airtime. So basically, Proven Strategies, we've had this race, the Sunshine Turf, on the calendar really since Labor Day. You know, we were working backwards from you know, from this date in January, with the hopes of running him one time in September, one time in October, giving him about 30 days off just to enjoy the green grass and sunshine, and then bringing him back into training, with this date on our calendar in, you know, bold underline. This is the spot that we wanted to have him return. Now, just because you pick a race on the calendar doesn't necessarily mean that the horse is going to cooperate and get there. And it also doesn't mean that it's going to be an easy spot. Thankfully, the horse did cooperate and is doing great, and Knockwood is healthy and is really looking forward. You know, we're all looking forward to his 4-year-old campaign. The race came up a little tougher than we anticipated, but that being said, you know, this horse has run against some of the top, you know, 3-year-old, now older turf horses in the country. So, you know, we're not going to, you know, yield because we're the second choice in the race. And like Len was saying before, you know, we study the races, and just because we had this one on the calendar in September, if he ended up being 20-to-1 in the race, doesn't mean that we would run it, just because we've been working backwards from this. So everything came together, thankfully. It looks like we're going to have clear skies tomorrow at you know, in Florida. And I'm appreciative that we got one of the closer to the rail spots for him, because he does have a front running style. And you know, the instructions to Ortiz tomorrow are going to be Go to the front, and if somebody really wants to beat you to the front end, make them beat you to the front end.
Okay, and I think I looked at the race, it's a pretty competitive race, actually. It seems like several horses have a pretty good shot. John, a couple of the horses, I inadvertently left my iPad in the other room, so I don't have the horses right in front of me. Maybe you can help me on
Sure.
that. But there's a couple of
Yeah.
horses in there that I found that, they're speed horses, in particular one, I think a little bit speed, like I think distance, maybe the distance doesn't seem to really have one at 1.16 miles. Like maybe it's a Mike Maker horse. I can't remember
Yep.
right offhand.
No,
And
you're exactly right. Yep.
yeah, exactly. So like, what do you think about just the body of the race itself and the horses that he's going to be facing?
Yeah, and again, there's 9 horses in the race, and I think you can make a legitimate case for 6 of them. My personal humble opinion, Mike Maker certainly is one of the top trainers around, and he knows how to get horses, ready for races in particular. And he's got an older horse, an 8-year-old, that has certainly proven itself on the turf and also on the Gulfstream turf. But Christina, I'm not just saying this because we own the horse, but I wouldn't trade our horse with anybody in this race. I think that we're very competitive, and I think that the only thing that would worry me is just that he has been off a short layoff, and sometimes horses need to kick off a little rust, coming back from a layoff. But this wasn't a 120, 180-day layoff. This was only, really just since the beginning of October. So it's not that long of a layoff. The other nice thing is that we've actually beaten 5 out of the 8 competitors in the race already. So I know that, we have a little bit of advantage because we've already defeated most of the field. And I feel like that our post position and our jockey and the way that horse is coming into the race, I think we have a really legitimate chance to win.
Okay, and the reason in the decision, I put this in the email the other day to the members, the decision or the fact that Jose Ortiz is going to be riding him, what was the decision there, the thinking?
Yeah, the nice thing about Gulfstream Park is that there's such a great group of riders there that you can't really go wrong with any of the top riders. And we originally thought that we were going to have Tyler riding us, and he was holding out his mount for E5 Racing. He's dating the daughter of E5, of Bob Edwards. So he kind of felt that he needed to run in, to ride. We didn't want to wait because we knew we were going to have one of the favorites in the race, and we wanted to lock into one of the top riders in Florida. So we locked into Jose Ortiz, and I don't think anybody can make a case as to why Jose is not one of the top 3 riders in the country right now. And we're very pleased to have him ride the horse again. When he rode the horse last time, we ran second, but we lost to Decorated Invader, who arguably is, last year was one of the top 2 or 3 3-year-old turf horses in the country. So we're certainly not hanging our head in shame losing to a horse of that caliber.
Yeah, definitely. I think, and also, this is the one thing, folks, that, John just pointed out in terms of these relationships. Sometimes, people inaccurately, often they read into why a jockey is riding one horse over another, because it has to be the better horse. No, because sometimes there's some other relationships that are involved that need to be addressed. So I think that's interesting. But again, we're not any lesser for having Jose Ortiz. And also, John, do you have a quick, I saw that Did It My Way worked today. Did you happen to speak to Linda? Did you happen to get any feedback from that? Or what were your thoughts?
Yeah, unfortunately, Christine, I didn't get a chance to speak to her because I was playing catch up on some work, because the past 4 days have been the Keeneland January sale. So I will have a conversation with her over the weekend on how he's doing. I know he's getting closer to running, and I know the expectations for him are not as high as Proven Strategies. I mean, they can't all be stake horses. And that's the reality of the business, is that if you get 1 out of every 9 of your horses that are stake horses, that's a pretty good ratio. So, we have our expectations a little bit lower for him, but that's not to say he can't be very competitive at the levels, the maiden claiming, races and some of the races that we have anticipated for him.
Right, definitely. Okay, well, thank you very much, Len. Thank you so much, John. Thank you so much for joining us. It was really great. And if anybody has a question subsequent to that, you can think of something different that comes up, send us an email, and then I'll be sure to forward it to either Len or John, or to both, depending on who the question's for, and then we can ask them. so we can get an answer for you. But that's great. Thank you, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us.
Our pleasure. And don't forget to root for him tomorrow.
Yes, we definitely
Okay.
will. Thank you,
All right.
Len. Thank you.
Great.